I died with regret in my chest and his name on my lips. Then fate gave me one impossible gift, a second life. This time, I will not lose the man who loved me in silence. I will not trust the smiles that destroyed my world, and I will not let my family fall into the same nightmare again. They thought they had buried my truth with my past. They were wrong, because when a broken heart comes back with memory, love becomes a vow, and revenge becomes destiny.
A life returned. I hold fast to the one who waited for me. Chapter 1. A Marriage Rewritten. My name is Lu Qinghe, the secondary daughter of the Lu residence. In my previous life, I died on a night of heavy snow on the icy tiles of the cold palace. A cup of poisoned wine still lay tipped beside my hand. Bitterness coated my lips, while outside the hall, laughter and celebration rang through the palace as though it were a festival. Only when my consciousness was about to fade did I understand something almost absurd. All my life, I had thought I was fighting for a way to survive. In truth, I had only been led by the nose, step after step, exactly where others wanted me to go. My father used me to steady his standing at court. My father's lawful wife hated me because my own mother had once enjoyed his favor. My elder legitimate sister, Lu Ruyan, pitied me and despised me in equal measure. She looked gentle and virtuous on the surface, yet behind my back she pushed me into trap after trap. And I was foolish enough to believe that if I could only climb a little higher, if I could win even a sliver of affection from that man, then I could exchange it for life, for myself, and for my birth mother. In the end, my mother died early, and I died miserably too. Only after my soul left my body did I finally see everything clearly. I saw Lu Ruyan leaning in that man's arms, weeping as she said she had had no choice but to let her younger sister die. I saw my father merely frown and tell the palace servants to drag my body away so it would not bring bad luck. I had struggled all my life, only to discover in the end not one person remembered me. And then, when I opened my eyes again, I returned to the year I was 17, to the very day the Lu family was choosing marriages for the two sisters. In my previous life, I had fought desperately to force my way into Prince Anne's residence, only to become a chess piece ground to dust. In this life, I asked of my own accord to marry Wei Chen-shou, Prince of Subei. Everyone in the capital knew that Wei Chen-shou was a man of few words, distant by nature, stationed year-round on the frontier with troops under his command. There was also a child in his household, a nephew who called him uncle, lively and unruly enough that everyone said becoming his stepmother would not be easy. But to me, a quiet marriage, one far from the whirlpool around the Eastern Palace, was already the best road I could hope for. Only after I truly entered the Prince of Subei's residence did I realize that nothing was the way the rumors said. Wei Chen-shou was not cold to me. If anything, he was gentle in a way I did not know how to handle.
Just like today, after the palace banquet, His Majesty bestowed several jewels upon us. While the other noble ladies were still bowing their thanks, Wei Chen-shou calmly chose a white jade hairpin inlaid with pale blue stones and placed it in my hand before everyone. "This suits you." His voice was still even, his expression unchanged, yet the fingertips brushing my wrist trembled slightly. For a moment I did not know how to reply, so I could only lower my voice and say, "Thank you, Your Highness." He looked at me for a moment, then turned away. That curt answer left all the ladies around us stunned. It left me stunned too. By the time we returned to the residence, Wei Yi, the little nephew he had raised since childhood, had not even climbed down from the carriage before tugging at my sleeve to tattle. "Mother Concert, Uncle deliberately picked the prettiest one today." The words "Mother Concert" made me pause. The boy was only 8, with round eyes and red lips. Usually he was as mischievous as a monkey, but whenever he called me that, it came so naturally, as if I had belonged in this residence for a very long time already. Wei Chen-shou frowned slightly. "Don't talk nonsense." Wei Yi clutched his forehead and put on an aggrieved face. "I'm not making things up. While everyone else was still choosing, Uncle looked your way 3 whole times." My ears grew hot. Wei Chen-shou said nothing more. He simply caught Wei Yi by the collar and handed him off to a nanny, then walked with me into the long corridor leading toward the main courtyard. The first moon of autumn shone clear as water. Shadows of the trees mottled the stone path below us. I walked half a step behind him, looking at the cool line of his profile, and an undescribable feeling rose in my chest. In my previous life, I had heard Wei Chen-shou's name many times. They said he was cold-faced and iron-hearted, indifferent to women, a man who cared for no one. They said years of warfare had left his temper unpredictable, so much so that even the servants in his own residence rarely dared approach him. But the man walking beside me now was nothing like the rumors. After a long silence, he suddenly asked, "Does your ankle still hurt from the other day?" I stared. It had only been a faint bruise from missing a step at the stone stairs. Even I had forgotten it, yet he still remembered. "It doesn't hurt anymore." He nodded. A little later he asked again, "You barely ate tonight. Shall I have the kitchen make a sweet soup for you?" I shook my head. "No need." "All right." Silence settled between us again. I did not know how to face him. In my previous life, I had always lived on guard, always calculating. With every person I met, I measured one step before daring to speak half a sentence. But with Wei Chen-zhou, he never asked about my past, never forced closeness on me, never used his power to demand that I become a perfect princess consort overnight. He simply laid down a soft road beneath my feet, as though if I wished it, I could take another step at any time. And that made me even more uneasy.
Why would a man like him treat me well? The thought followed me all the way to my chamber. I had just been about to say, "Rest early, Your Highness," when he suddenly turned back. His calm gaze met mine, but something deeper seemed to stir in his eyes, something like waiting, something like restraint. Jinghe. It was the first time he had spoken my name like that. My heart skipped hard against my ribs. "Yes?" He was silent for a moment. In the end, he only said, "If there is anything in this residence that you are not used to, tell me." It was perfectly ordinary, a simple kindness, nothing excessive. Yet for some reason, my throat tightened. In my previous life, no one had ever asked whether I was used to anything. I lowered my head and answered softly, "All right." That night, the two of us lay on the same bed with half a quilt's distance between us. His breathing was light, but his body remained tense, as if he were afraid of accidentally brushing against me. I lay with my eyes closed for a long time without falling asleep. And when I finally drifted off, a hazy scene appeared before me. It was the Lantern Festival from some year long ago. The streets were packed with people, flower lanterns glowing like falling stars. I was gripping the bridge rail, my head splitting with pain, searching for someone in the crowd. Then a hand came from behind to steady my shoulder, and a low male voice sounded by my ear. "Careful." I turned and saw a pair of very deep eyes, the lantern light glimmering at their corners. In that instant, my heart pounded until it hurt. But before I could clearly see the man's face, a voice woke me. "Your Highness, dawn has broken." I jolted awake, my palms cold. Beside me, half of Wei Chen-zhou's pillow was already empty. For some reason, I felt as though something inside me had suddenly fallen short by a beat.
Chapter 2. Warm Lights in the Prince's Residence. After changing my clothes, I had barely stepped outside when I heard laughter coming from the side hall. Wei Yi was practicing calligraphy. To say he was trying to write beautifully would have been generous. Ink was splashed all over the table, and the large characters beneath his brush leaned and twisted like snakes crawling across the page. Wei Chen-zhou sat to one side in his neat black robes, a military text in hand, only occasionally glancing up. The moment Wei Yi saw me, he dropped his brush, his eyes lighting up. "Mother consort!" He ran toward me so fast he nearly overturned the inkstone. Wei Chen-zhou put down his book and said calmly, "Walk properly." Wei Yi pulled a face, but obediently stopped in front of me and held up his ink-stained hands. "Mother consort, look, is my writing prettier today?" I looked at the page and fell silent. The enormous character in the middle was clearly meant to be the word for peace, but if I had not known in advance, I would have thought it was a crippled crab. I forced myself not to laugh. "You've improved." Wei Yi immediately beamed and turned to boast to Wei Chen-zhou. "Did you hear that, uncle? Mother consort said I've improved." Wei Chen-zhou glanced once at the page, his expression unchanged. "Write it 10 more times." Wei Yi's little face fell at once. "Why do I have to write it again? You're clearly jealous because Mother consort only praised me." I laughed for real. The sound had barely left my mouth when both Wei Chen-zhou and I paused. It had been a long time since I had laughed so freely. In my previous life, every smile had to be measured. Who was watching? Who was listening? Too loud, it was improper. Too soft, it was called false. Later, when I entered a place of endless struggle, I nearly forgot what it felt like to laugh naturally at all. I never expected that in this prince's residence, one childish remark could make my heart feel light again. Wei Chen-zhou looked at me once more, then rose to his feet. "Breakfast."
The breakfast in the residence was always simple but refined. Lotus seed porridge, steamed dumplings filled with shrimp, a few cold vegetable dishes, and a small plate of sweets. I had just sat down when Wei Yi leaned close and whispered as though sharing a secret. Uncle did it on purpose. I didn't understand. Did what on purpose? He had to go to court early today, but he still sat there watching me practice calligraphy. Usually the nannies are enough. He blinked. He definitely wanted to see Mother Consort. Wei Yi, Wei Chenzhou said, neither harsh nor mild. I know, I'm eating now. The boy sat back down, still muttering under his breath. Can't even tell the truth. I lowered my head and drank my porridge, too embarrassed to look at the man opposite me. A moment later, an extra piece of soft pastry appeared in my bowl. I looked up to see Wei Chenzhou's chopsticks just withdrawing. The kitchen maybe's fresh. Try one. I pressed my lips together. Thank you. He nodded and said nothing more, only the tips of his ears had reddened a little. After breakfast, he had to leave for court. Before going, he stood at the doorway for a moment, as though he wanted to say something. In the end, he merely reminded me that the weather was turning colder and that I should not stay by the lake too long. Once he was gone, Wei Yi poked his head out from behind a pillar and sighed like a little old man. Uncle is really slow. I did not know whether to laugh or cry. Who taught you to say things like that? I can see it myself. He propped his chin in his hand. He looks different when he looks at Mother Consort. My heart stirred, but I kept my face calm. Different how? He doesn't look like someone holding a blade and killing enemies anymore. He thought for a long time, then declared, like someone who just found a treasure and is afraid of breaking it so he doesn't dare touch it too hard. I rigid. Tao Nyang burst out laughing beside us. Encouraged, Wei Yi grew even more enthusiastic. Yesterday, in the palace, Wei Chenzhou even asked me first whether women prefer hairpins or bracelets. I said whichever one is prettier. Then he stood over the reward table for so long that the princess consort of Prince Qi thought he was choosing for somebody else. That's enough, I cut in hurriedly, my face burning. Wei Yi stuck out his tongue and ran off with his hands over his head. In the entire residence, only he dared speak so recklessly. And strangely enough, I did not find it annoying at all. That afternoon, I went for a walk in the back garden. The Prince of Subei's residence was very large, but its scenery was never ostentatious. The rocks, trees, and lake were arranged in a simple, elegant way. There was a kind of order to it that reminded me very much of its master, straightforward, clean, with no taste for display. I sat in the pavilion by the lake for a while as the autumn wind skimmed over the water. For no clear reason, a sense of familiarity rose in me so sharply it was almost uncomfortable. As though I had sat here before, as though someone had spoken to me here before, as though I had waited for someone here for a very long time. But the moment I tried to remember, pain stabbed through my head again. At that exact moment, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw that Wei Chenzhou was already standing there. He had just returned from court and had not yet changed out of his formal robes. The late afternoon sun fell across his dark sleeves, making him seem even colder and sharper. Yet the eyes he turned on me were very gentle.
"Why are you out here alone?" I answered on instinct. The room felt a little stuffy. He stepped closer, though he still kept a respectful distance. "If you prefer quiet, there is a small library in the east courtyard. Fewer people go there." I nodded. Wei Yi came running over from the distance, a servant following behind with a wooden box in his arms. Panting, the boy said, "Uncle, the thing you sent for has arrived." Wei Chenzhou took the box and opened it. Inside was a golden hairpin set with a small magnolia blossom of white jade, elegant without being showy. I stared, not understanding what he meant to do, until he extended the box toward me. There were too many people in the palace yesterday, so I chose in haste. He spoke slowly, as though every word had been considered many times. "This one suits the green dress you often wear better." I froze. It was not one of the imperial rewards. He had prepared it himself. "Your Highness!" I had barely started to speak when he looked away. "It isn't anything especially valuable. If you don't like it, I can have it exchanged." My fingers suddenly tightened around the edge of my sleeve. This man was truly strange. On the outside, he was like a sword sheathed in its scabbard, cold and keen, but the things he placed before me were always details so small that no one would notice them without care. The bruise on my ankle, how many bites I had eaten, the colors of the dresses I favored, the hairpin I had worn yesterday because the newer ones in my box were all too ostentatious. I took the box from him and lowered my head. "I like it. I liked it very much." Wei Yi immediately squinted with delight. "I told you, Mother Consort would definitely like it." "You knew beforehand?" I asked. "I helped Uncle choose it."
He crossed his arms proudly, but he kept asking the same questions again and again. I thought he was about to lead troops into battle. Wei Chenjiao frowned. Have you finished writing your 10 copies? Wei Yi yelped and immediately ran off. I could not help laughing. This time, Wei Chenjiao did not look away. He stood in the late afternoon light, watching me laugh. In his eyes, it was as though a faint layer of brightness slowly blossomed open. At that moment, something in my heart softened. Perhaps the choice I made this life truly was not the wrong one. Chapter 3. A Question Beneath the Moon. That night, I wore the magnolia hairpin Wei Chenjiao had given me. As Town Yang adjusted my hair, she clicked her tongue in admiration. His Highness looks cold, but he is more attentive than many women. This hairpin suits you perfectly. I said nothing. In the bronze mirror, candlelight softened my face. I suddenly thought of myself in my previous life, always trying to dress as brilliantly as possible, always trying to make that man notice me. And the harder I tried, the more I lost the way I had originally looked. In this life, I did not want to compete with anyone anymore. I only wanted to live as though I were truly alive. And yet, the longer I lived in the Prince of Subei's residence, the more I watched Wei Chenjiao, the less I could understand him. His gentleness toward me did not feel like duty. If it were only because our marriage had been decreed by imperial edict, he would not need to remember such tiny details. If it were only because he needed a princess consort in name, he certainly would not look at me as though he were guarding something he had once lost by accident and searched for over a very long time. I thought about it again and still could not find an answer. So when night fell and we walked back along the corridor together, moonlight drifting silently over his shoulders, I suddenly asked, "Your Highness, had we ever met before?" His steps stopped. I could hear the wind passing through the bamboo leaves. I could hear my own heartbeat as well. He turned his head slowly. His eyes had always been calm, yet now it was as though a stone had been dropped into a still lake, sending ring after quiet ring across the surface. "Why do you ask that?" I pressed my lips together and could only tell half the truth. "It just feels as though I may have known you before." He looked at me for a very long time, so long that I nearly wanted to take the question back. Then he let out a soft breath. "Some things do no harm if they are forgotten." That answer was not a denial. I lifted my face, wanting to read more from his expression, but he moved his gaze away too quickly, as if afraid of revealing too much. A strange ache rose in my chest. Ever since returning to life, I had always believed I alone was carrying the past, but the look in Wei Chenjiao's eyes at that moment made me feel that perhaps he too was hiding a memory and had been holding it even longer than I had. I took half a step forward and, as though bewitched, reached out and wrapped my arms around him. The moment I touched the firm breadth of his chest, even I was startled. Wei Chenjiao's entire body went still. I could hear how hard his heart was beating. "Qinghe," his voice dropped lower. I came back to myself a little, only then realizing how bold I had been. Before I could think of any explanation, his strong arms slowly closed around me, drawing me into his embrace. Not too tightly, but so very steady. The warmth of his body spread into mine, and suddenly the bridge of my nose stung. Just then, a maid's voice sounded from the courtyard outside. Your Highness Princess Consort, the kitchen asks whether you would like a late meal brought in." I let go of him at once, as though burned. Everything beyond the door fell silent. Whoever stood outside had certainly heard enough to guess something. I did not dare lift my head. My ears felt as if they were on fire. Wei Chenjiao, on the other hand, was far calmer than I was. He only replied, "No need, you may withdraw." The maid hurried away. I drew in a breath and blurted, I only—" "He knows," he said quietly. That "I know" only flustered me more. Thankfully, he did not press me for an explanation. He simply opened the door, waited for me to step inside first, then followed after me. Throughout the short walk from the doorway to the table, I did not dare look at him even once. In the end, he spoke first. "Would you like to go out tomorrow?" I looked up. Go out? The Duke of Key's residence is holding a chrysanthemum poetry gathering. The women of the noble households will all attend. He paused. "If you do not wish to go, you may decline." I remembered it at once. I had attended that same gathering in my previous life. At the time, I had not yet married. I wanted to force my way into my elder sister's social circle, yet I also feared being mocked, so I had prepared for 2 full days and nights.
It was at that banquet, too, that Lu Ryan had dropped a few careless-sounding remarks, making the young ladies around us all understand that I was trying to climb above my station. I had returned humiliated and furious, and quarreled bitterly with the mistress of the household. Thinking of that, I nodded slowly. I'll go. I could not keep avoiding things forever. If I had truly been given another chance, then there were certain people and certain matters I had to face. Wei Chen-zhou looked at me as though he guessed part of what lay in my mind, but he asked nothing further. After a while, he only said, "I can accompany you as far as the outer gate." That made me pause. A poetry gathering was a place for noble women. Men rarely escorted them all the way there. Yet he said it so naturally, as though if it occurred to him, then naturally he would do it. I shook my head. "There's no need. It's only a banquet." He was silent a moment, then said, "Then I'll wait for you to come back." Not "this prince," not a formal phrase of courtesy, just, "I'll wait for you to come back." My heart trembled very softly.
The next morning, the instant Wei Yi heard I was going to a banquet, he planted his hands on his hips and instructed me solemnly, "Mother consort, come back early. If anyone says anything unpleasant, just remember their names. I'll tell uncle to deal with them." I laughed. "And who exactly can you deal with?" "I don't need to deal with them myself. I only need to report them." Tao Nyong covered her mouth and laughed beside us. Suddenly, I realized that ever since arriving at this residence, I had laughed more than I had in my entire previous life. Before I stepped into the carriage, I turned back for one last look. Wei Chen-zhou stood on the high stone steps, the autumn wind stirring the wide sleeves of his robe. He said nothing, yet he remained there watching until my carriage had vanished around the corner. The sight filled my chest with a very strange feeling, as though I were not leaving the prince's residence to attend a banquet at all, but only going out for a little while and then returning home. That single thought was enough to make warmth quietly gather at my fingertips. Chapter 4. The Poetry Gathering and the Cold Lake. The Duke of Qi's residence was livelier than usual today. The chrysanthemums were in full bloom. Small tables had been set all through the garden, each laid with tea, sweets, and paper and brushes for the young ladies to compose poetry. The moment I stepped down from the carriage, I felt countless eyes turning toward me. Ever since I had married into the Prince of Subei's residence in Lu Ruyan's place, there had been no shortage of whispers in the capital. Some said I was fortunate. Others said I was calculating. And still others waited to see how many days I could last as the prince's stepmother before that child drove me back to my maiden home in tears. I ignored it all and simply followed the maid leading the way. What I had not expected was that the first person I would meet in the garden was Lu Ruyan. She was much thinner than I remembered. In the past, Lu Ruyan had always been the most striking legitimate daughter in the capital. Fair skin, phoenix eyes, gentle manners, and a voice as soft as spring wind. But now, though her cosmetics were still applied with care, the hollows beneath her eyes had deepened, and her smile looked weak on her lips. The instant she saw me, she faltered for a beat. Then the familiar smile quickly returned. "You've come, little sister." I curved my lips faintly. "Elder sister?" The people around us immediately grew a little quieter. Everyone knew that when the Prince of Subei's residence had first come to the Lu family to seek a marriage alliance, the rumors had pointed to the legitimate daughter. In the end, however, it was a secondary daughter like me who was married off. Outwardly, everyone called it fate, but inwardly, no one believed there had not been some hidden twist behind it. Lu Ruyan stepped closer and lowered her voice so only the two of us could hear. "Judging by how you look, life in the prince's residence has treated you well." "So-so," I replied lightly. "So-so," she smiled, but her eyes turned cold. "Do you know what people outside are saying? They say you were very clever and climbing high. They say you stole your elder sister's marriage and even been treasured by the prince like Yade." I looked straight at her. "If hearing that displeases you, then perhaps you should ask father why he changed the name on the marriage card back then." The smile vanished entirely from her lips. A second later, her voice softened again. "Do you still blame me?" I nearly laughed out loud. In my previous life, it was exactly because of that innocent tone, "Do you still blame me?" that I had been deceived again and again. She would push me out in front, and I would still think myself overly suspicious, still think she had truly been forced. But now, hearing it again, all I felt was a cold sense of falseness. "I don't blame you," I said slowly. "The people who deserve blame, I have remembered every one of them." Her expression changed. Just then, several noblewomen approached. Lu Ruyan immediately resumed her graceful, proper manner, and even reached out to take my hand, as though we sisters were very close. I did not expose her before so many people. I merely withdrew my hand in silence. The banquet began. People composed poetry, admired flowers, chatted, and laughed. I sat in a somewhat secluded corner, with no wish to participate too deeply. But from beginning to end, I felt a gaze fixed on me. Only when I rose with the other women and walked to the lake behind the garden did I realize that Lu Ruyan was keeping pace beside me. The lake reflected the pale autumn sun. Ripples trembled on the surface. Suddenly, Lu Ruyan spoke. "Have you ever regretted it?" I looked at her. "Regretted what?" "Regretted changing your mind back then. If you had remained as stubborn as before, perhaps the person sitting in that position now would be someone else." The words struck me as almost laughable. Did she still think I cared about that seat? I was just about to answer when a sharp pain stabbed through my head. Wind rose over the water. The lake, the stone bridge, the rows of willows, the chatter and laughter of young ladies by the shore, all of it suddenly overlaid another scene. My younger self, drenched through, being shoved toward the lake by several noble girls. Someone was giggling. Someone was saying that a secondary daughter like me dared to force her way in. Then a strong shove came from behind. My vision blurred, my body lurched, my foot caught in the hem of my skirt, exactly as it had just now. I slipped. The splash roared in my ears. Freezing water flooded my mouth and nose. The broken fragments of memory drove into my mind all at once, like shattered glass. I tried to struggle, but my body sank instead. Through the water above me, I saw someone dive in after me. A strong arm dragged me upward, and a low, urgent voice, one I had never heard from the present Wei Chenzhou, rang out, "Qing He, open your eyes." I came awake to the panicked cries around me. Someone was shaking me. Someone was shouting, "The princess consort of Su Bei has fallen into the water." Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw was Wei Yi leaning over the bedside, his eyes red-rimmed. "Mother consort, you are awake." Before I could answer, Wei Chenzhou's figure appeared behind the boy. He stood close enough that I could clearly see the faint shadows beneath his eyes, as though he had not slept all night. He was always almost unnaturally composed, yet at that moment there was worry in his gaze that he had not had time to hide. "Do you feel unwell anywhere?" he asked. I looked at him, my lips trembling. The chaotic memories in my mind slowly knit themselves together. I remembered now. The person who had saved me that year was him.
Chapter 5. Memories by the Lake. I remembered many things. When I was 13 and still living in the Lu residence, I was only a secondary daughter, and because my mother had once been favored, the lawful wife and the servants of the main branch pressed down on me even more. On the surface, everyone maintained a show of courtesy, but whenever I went out to banquets, those noble young ladies always found ways to make me understand that I stood a rank beneath them. That day, by the lake behind the Duke of Chi's residence, I had been deliberately shoved into the water. The autumn was bitterly cold, the lake deeper than I had imagined, and I did not know how to swim. The harder I struggled, the faster I sank. At first, the people on the bank were laughing. Only when they realized something was truly wrong did they begin to panic and cry out for help. That was when someone jumped in to save me. By the time I woke, that person had already covered for me. He simply said I had slipped by accident. Because of that, no rumors spread, and the Lu family could not use the excuse of damaged dignity to punish me. As for me, I had been too embarrassed, and because I had only managed to glimpse the cool line of his profile, I had not dared ask further. I only remembered that afterward he silently taught me how to swim in the waterside pavilion of the Imperial Academy, where the sons of noble families sometimes came to practice riding and martial skills. I did not know why he did it, only I knew that he spoke little, yet every time I swallowed water or choked, he patiently pulled me back and told me not to be afraid. Falling under once isn't the frightening part. The frightening part is that later, when you face water again, you'll forget that you also know how to rise. At the time, I did not fully understand those words. Only later did I realize he had not only been teaching me how to swim, he had also been teaching me not to see myself as lesser. It was only a pity that after learning how to stay afloat in water, I still never learned how to live among people. I still stubbornly rushed towards places where I did not belong, only to die without even a whole body left behind. Lying in bed, I looked at Wei Chenzhou for a very long time. Compared to the youth in my memories, he was now much calmer and quieter, but those cold, sharp features, those eyes that always hid too many things, were impossible to mismistake. I called softly, "Your Highness." He stepped closer. "I'm here. I want some water." He immediately helped me sit up and personally brought a cup of warm water to my lips. His movements were careful enough that it was as though he were handling something fragile. When I finished drinking, I looked at the hand he had placed against the edge of the bed. That hand had once dragged me out of freezing water. It had also once held mine to teach me how to sweep the water, how to breathe, how to keep my body afloat. But in my previous life, I had forgotten it all. Not only had I forgotten him, I had even forgotten what it felt like to be quietly protected by someone else. I lowered my eyes, my voice tightening. "I'm sorry." He paused. "Why are you apologizing?" I could not tell him that I was apologizing for an entire missed lifetime. I could not say that perhaps in my last life he had watched me sink into fate while I kept looking elsewhere. So I could only say softly, "At the banquet today, I made your Highness worry." He looked at me for a moment, then said quietly, "I was only afraid I would not make it in time." It was such a light sentence, but it felt as though someone had seized my heart and squeezed. Wei Yi, sitting beside the bed, hurried to cut in when he heard that. Luckily, Uncle carried Mother Consort all the way back himself. Everyone on the road was staring. Someone even asked whether Uncle wanted the imperial physician first or the culprit punished first. I stared at him in surprise. Wei Chanzhao frowned slightly. "Wei Yi, I know, I'm going to drink my medicine and practice my writing." The boy hopped off the bed, then turned back and winked at me before leaving. "Mother Consort, get some rest." The room was left with only the two of us. The wind entered through the window and stirred the gauze curtains. In the end, I gathered my courage to ask, "That year by the lake, you were the one who saved me, weren't you?" His shoulders stiffened slightly. This time he did not avoid the question. He only nodded slowly. "Yes." "Why didn't you say so?" He was silent for a very long time. It wasn't something worth mentioning. I merely did it in passing. The bitterness in me was so sharp I almost laughed. If it had merely been in passing, how could he still remember my affairs after so many years? If it had merely been in passing, why did his eyes always look the way they did whenever he gazed at me? I looked at him and said softly, "It wasn't in passing." He lifted his eyes. I continued, one word at a time. The lake, the swimming lessons, the lantern festival, where I had once arranged to meet someone but was called back halfway there, and how afterward I had remembered a pair of eyes under the lantern light for years without knowing whose they were.
Wei Chenzhou listened in silence. Only after I had finished did he ask, "You still remember that lantern festival night?" I nodded. I remember the feeling of searching for someone, but in the life that followed, my mind became too chaotic. Too many things interfered, so I kept thinking that person was... I stopped. I did not want to speak that man's name. He seemed to understand. A very faint sadness passed through his eyes, though only for an instant. "It's all right," he said. "Remembering now is enough." That only made my heart ache more. A person who had waited for me for so many years, and in the end, all he said was, "Remembering now is enough." That evening, after I took my medicine, I thought he would go to sleep in the study as he usually did. But when he stood up, I instinctively caught hold of his sleeve. "Tonight," I hesitated. "Could you not go to the study?" He turned to look at me. His gaze darkened visibly. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'm afraid of dreaming." A moment later, he answered hoarsely, "All right." I lay facing inward, and I could feel that he sat outside the covers for a long while before finally getting into bed. His whole body was still as tense as ever, as though coming any closer to me would cost him all control. But this time, unlike before, I shifted toward him of my own accord. Separated only by a thin quilt, I touched his arm. "That night at the Lantern Festival," I asked with my eyes closed, "did you wait for me a long time?" I heard his breathing catch. After what felt like ages, he replied, "Not very long."
I did not believe him, but I did not press further. I only know that something in my heart was slowly softening, like winter snow beginning to melt. After a while, another thought rose quietly to the surface. In my previous life, after I died, Wei Chenzhou had died very early as well. At the time, I had only heard vaguely that the Prince of Subei had fallen gravely ill and passed away. But a man like him, strong in body, battle-tested over many years, how could he have died so suddenly? Lying in the darkness, I opened my eyes. If heaven had truly given me a second chance in this life, then I did not only want to live in peace, I also wanted to know what he had died from. And I wanted to change that ending.
Chapter 6. Hugo Temple. After I fell into the water, Wei Chenzhou almost refused to let me leave the residence for several days. The food, the medicine, the warm cloaks, even the charcoal brazier in my room were all arranged under his personal instructions. Wei Yi even whispered to me in secret that Uncle had nearly ordered the lake in the residence filled in completely. The words made me want to laugh and ache at the same time. 3 days later, when my body had mostly recovered, I used the excuse of going to Hugo Temple to offer incense and give thanks to the Buddha. Only then did he finally nod his permission. Hugo Temple lay to the west of the capital, backed against the mountain. Our carriage stopped at the foot of the stone steps. The mountain wind carried the scent of incense and dry leaves, cool against my face and clear enough to wake the mind. Taonyang accompanied me up the mountain, but at the main gate a young novice stopped her and said that the abbot wished to see only me. I was not surprised. In my previous life, after my death, my wandering soul had drifted here one rainy night. I had seen an eternal lamp burning before the main hall, heard the faint echo of a wooden fish drum, and glimpsed a figure kneeling on the stone floor for a very long time. Thinking back on it now, perhaps none of it had been a dream. The abbot of Hugo Temple was an elderly monk with white hair, compassionate eyes, and a gaze bright enough to see through people. I had barely completed my bow when he looked at me for a long time and smiled. "Your Highness has finally remembered." My heart trembled. "You knew?" "There are many bonds in this world. The people living inside them may not always see clearly, but those standing outside sometimes do." He slowly turned the prayer beads in his hand. "You came here today. Do you wish to ask about your previous life or about another person's heart?" I knelt down and lowered my head. "Both." He did not answer at once. Instead, he told me to follow the novice to the back of the temple. Behind the main hall, a short but steep mountain path climbed upward. The stone steps stretched on, with no visible end. Wind moved through the pine forest, making a long, hollow sound. The novice stopped halfway up and pointed above. Last year, His Highness climbed all the way to the summit of this mountain. I froze. "Last year?" "That's right," the novice said softly. "Last winter, the snow was very heavy. His Highness came alone to the temple in the middle of the night, without any attendants, and said he wished to pray for someone to return. By the temple's custom, to make a great vow, one must climb all 9,000 stone steps, kneeling and bowing on every single one. An ordinary person would struggle just to climb them, let alone in a night of snow."
I stood there in shock. My ears rang, and I could hardly hear the words that followed. At the time, the abbot advised him not to cling so fiercely. Life and death have their own decrees, and someone who is gone is very hard to bring back. But His Highness asked only one question. If he completed it, would there still be even a small chance? The abbot said nothing in this world is certain. Even so, His Highness still went through with it. I looked up the endless flight of stone steps. Another scene rose in my mind, entirely different from the autumn day before me now. Snow whitening the mountain, the temple lamps dim in the distance, a man in black, moving one step at a time, kneeling one step at a time, his forehead touching the freezing stone, while snow and blood soaked into his sleeves. Wei Chenzhou, the man the entire capital called cold as frozen stone, had quietly climbed all 9,000 steps alone, just to pray that I might live again. I did not know how long I stood there. By the time I returned to myself, my face was already wet with tears. The novice retreated. I did not know when the old monk had come to stand behind me. His voice was very soft. "Your Highness, he prayed for you not so that you would spend the rest of your days in guilt." I choked on my words. "Master, why would he go that far?" The old monk looked toward the stone steps, bright silver under the autumn light. "Because there was an attachment he could not release," he said, "and because he believed he had arrived too late." I shook my head. It was not that he had come too late. It was that I had wandered lost for too long. Wiping my tears away, I asked the question that mattered most. In my previous life, did His Highness truly die of illness? The old monk was silent for a moment before he answered. Not exactly. Please tell me clearly, Master. The people who meant to harm you at that time did not wish to let His Highness live either, he said. He investigated your case and touched too many things that should not have been touched. In the end, he was poisoned, though outwardly it was said only that he died of grave illness. I clenched my sleeve, as I had thought. Pain seized my heart until it drew tight. So in that previous life, after my death, he had not been indifferent as others believed. He had investigated for me. He had wanted to overturn the case for me, and in the end, he had been killed in silence. What poison was it? I asked. A poison mixed into incense, the old monk replied, his gaze resting on me, taken in bit by bit over many days until it formed. In this life, you have returned. Some things can indeed be changed, but to change them, you must remain clear-headed. I nodded. When I left Hugo Temple, it felt as though fire were burning inside my chest. The moment the carriage entered the capital, I did not even wait to reach the rear gate of the residence. I ordered the driver to go faster. Tao Nyong sat beside me in alarm, asking what had happened, but I only shook my head.
I wanted to see Wei Qinzhou. At once, when the carriage stopped before the residence gate, I nearly ran straight inside. I had only crossed the front courtyard when the steward told me His Highness had just returned and was in the study. I turned to go there, but familiar footsteps suddenly sounded from the opposite corridor. I looked up. Wei Qinzhou was walking toward me. Beside him, Wei Yi carried 2 skewers of candy hawthorn, still pouting because his uncle had refused to let him eat them before supper. The instant Wei Qinzhou saw me, his gaze halted. Perhaps because I had run too fast, the hair at my temples was loose, and my eyes were still red. He had not even had time to ask what was wrong before I ran straight to him and threw my arms around him in the middle of the corridor. Wei Yi's mouth dropped open. All the servants behind us lowered their heads at once, pretending they had seen absolutely nothing. My impact forced Wei Qinzhou back half a step, his whole body going taut immediately. A moment later, his arms slowly came around me and held me in return. What happened? His voice was low and urgent. I buried my face in his chest, and tears began falling again. Nothing. My voice was hoarse. I just missed you very much. The arm around me tightened at once. Beside us, Wei Yi lifted both candied hawthorn skewers to cover his face and drawled, "Oh, I don't see anything at all." I was crying and laughing at the same time. And for the first time in front of so many people, the rims of Wei Qinzhou's ears turned entirely red. But he did not let me go. And in that moment, I suddenly understood something. From this day forward, I would never again let myself miss another chance.
Chapter 7. The Man Who Once Prayed for My Return. After returning from Hugo Temple, I no longer avoided my own feelings. I began waiting for Wei Qinzhou to eat with me, asking whether court had tired him that day, sitting beside him while he read official documents, and when there was leisure, going into the garden with Wei Yi to cut paper kites. Every time I neared, Wei Qinzhou could still keep his face composed, but his ears reddened more and more easily. Wei Yi clicked his tongue and said that his uncle could command an army of 100,000 men, but could not withstand one gentle sentence from his princess consort. I laughed, while Wei Qinzhou turned cold-faced and told him to copy 10 more large script sheets. But in my heart, I understood that days this warm could not last unless I cut off the hidden danger quickly. In my previous life, the poison had been an incense poison that accumulated little by little over time. If someone wanted to bring down Wei Qinzhou by those means, then the culprit had to be someone very close to the inner household of the Prince of Subei's residence, or someone with a long-standing route for sending things into the residence without arousing suspicion. I began quietly paying attention to everything inside the household. The first thing I checked was the incense. Using the excuse that the autumn air was dry and that I wanted to change to a milder fragrance, I had Tao Nyong inspect every incense cake, incense cone, and scented sachet being used in the various courtyards. On the surface, it looked like an inventory for the women's quarters. In truth, I wanted to know where every fragrance was coming from. Very quickly, a familiar name appeared: Jingfang Studio, the most famous fragrance shop in the capital, supplier of noble households throughout the city. In my previous life, Lu Ruyan had been especially fond of the fragrances from this place. Every time I met her, she carried a faint orchid scent with a sweet finish beneath it. If one inhaled it too long, it left the head slightly dizzy. I did not dare draw a conclusion from instinct alone, but I neither believed it was a coincidence. That evening, when Wei Chenzhao returned from the study, I told him about changing the incense in the residence. He listened in silence, and only after I had finished did he ask, "You suspect Jingfang's studio?" "Not only suspect it," I looked at him, "I also suspect someone from the Lu family is behind it. It may even be connected to the Eastern Palace." He looked at me for a moment without asking how I had reached that conclusion. Perhaps after I had gradually remembered so many things from another life, he understood that I was holding clues carried over from another life. "All right," he said, "I'll have it investigated." The decisiveness of that answer startled me slightly. "You're not going to ask where I got this suspicion from?" His gaze softened. "If you say it, then I believe it." Only 4 words, yet they were so heavy I almost could not bear them. I lowered my eyes and caught the edge of his robe. "Then you must promise me something too." "What is it?" "No matter what we discover later, no matter what you intend to do, you must let me know. You are not allowed to shoulder everything alone anymore." He looked at me and stayed silent for quite a long time. I knew he was hesitating. A man like him was used to carrying everything himself, used to standing in front, used to shielding others behind him. But in my previous life, that very habit had led him onto the path of death. I tightened my hold. "Wei Changzhao." It was the first time I had called him by his full name. His breathing caught. I lifted my head. "In this life, I am here not to be hidden behind your protection until I can no longer see. I want to stand beside you." Only after a very long moment did he nod slowly. "All right." I let out a breath. A gust of wind slipped through the crack in the door. Candlelight trembled and cast alternating bands of brightness and shadow across his face. For no reason, I thought again of him kneeling across those 9,000 cold stone steps. The image alone was enough to send pain through my chest. I raised my hand and touched his forehead. "Did you leave a scar here after that day at the temple?" He looked slightly startled. "The temple?" I knew I had spoken too much, but I no longer wanted to hide it. Quietly, I said, "I know now." His expression changed for real. "What do you know?" "That you once prayed for me to come back." The room fell so silent that even the faint crackle of the brazier could be heard. He stared at me as though one more word from my mouth would shatter the calm shell he had worn for so long. After a moment, he asked hoarsely, "Who told you?" "The master at Huguo Temple." I took his hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" He pulled his hand back, not because he wanted to avoid me, but as though he no longer knew where to place it. "That is all in the past. It may be in the past for you, but not for me." I did not blink as I looked at him. "Now that I know, how can I pretend it never happened?" His lips pressed into a hard line. "Jingha," he said slowly, "I don't want this matter to become a burden in your heart." It isn't a burden. Tears burned at my eyes, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "It just makes my heart ache for you." That was the truth. When he heard it, the cold rigidity around him finally dissolved. He lowered his head until his forehead touched mine lightly. "The day you died, I only thought that if I had arrived one step sooner, it would have been better." My eyes stung. "You were not too late," my voice caught. "I was only too slow to see." I had never spoken words like those to anyone, but in front of Wei Chenzhao, all my calculations seemed no longer necessary. I only wanted him to know I understood now. I truly understood. He closed his eyes and pulled me into his embrace. It wasn't wild, not fevered, yet the urgency in that movement was enough to feel as though I might melt apart. That night, for the first time, there was no half-step of distance left between us. The next morning, the first report from the men he had sent to investigate came back. Jingfang's studio truly had suspicious dealings with a former steward of the Lu family. Every month, a considerable sum of silver passed through their hands. Among the items sent was an incense called Quiet Mind, delivered into the Prince of Subei's residence under the name of a special gift for Wei Chenzhao from a relative on the princess consort's maternal side. A relative from the princess consort's maiden family. I laughed coldly. As expected, the Lu family had already started meddling long ago. But what chilled me even more was the final line at the bottom of the report. The person whose name had been used most often to purchase this incense lately was none other than Lu Ruyan. Chapter 8. Old Letters in the Hidden Compartment. I did not move against the Lu family at once. If you want to break a person, merely catching the tail of one scheme is not enough. I needed to know what Lu Ryan wanted, who was supporting her, and what other methods she was still hiding. Fortunately, the opportunity came quickly. 3 days later, an invitation arrived from the minister's residence, saying that the old madam missed her granddaughter and wished for me to return home for a family dinner. The wording was warm and affectionate, as if grandmother and granddaughter had always shared a deep bond. If I had still been the person I was in my previous life, perhaps I would have longed for even that false scrap of familial warmth. But now, when I looked at it, I saw only 2 words: a probe. After reading the invitation, Wei Chen Xiao tapped his fingers lightly against the table. "If you don't want to go, then don't." I smiled faintly. "Of course I'm going. They've already set the stage. How could I not show up?" He looked at me. "I'll go with you." "All right." The answer came so quickly that he seemed a little taken aback. I looked at him and deliberately teased. "What, did I think you would refuse?" I set down my teacup. "If we are husband and wife, what is wrong with leaning on my husband a little?" The tips of his ears reddened faintly. That only made me enjoy teasing him. On the day we returned to the Lu residence, the carriage from the Prince of Subei's household had barely stopped at the gate before the steward and servants came hurrying out to receive us. Father's expression when he came to greet us looked respectful enough, but he could not hide the probing look in his eyes. He likely had not expected Wei Chen Xiao to truly come with me. In the main hall, the old madam sat in the seat of honor. The moment she saw me, she pretended to tear up and reproached me for not coming home to visit for so long. The lawful wife of the household put on a kindly face and asked whether I had grown thinner or heavier. Lu Ryan sat slightly below them, and her complexion looked even paler than the last time I had seen her at the poetry gathering. I offered greetings slowly and properly, every bit of etiquette in place. But inside me, not the slightest ripple stirred. Halfway through the meal, Father finally began to edge towards the real point. He said there had been many matters at court recently, and asked whether the Prince of Subei's residence might put in a good word with His Majesty on behalf of Prince Anne. And he also said that Lu Ryan was finding life difficult in Prince Anne's residence and needed me as her younger sister to visit more often and help support her. The longer I listened, the more absurd it sounded. So after failing to marry into the Prince of Subei's residence, Lu Yan had smoothly boarded Prince Anne's boat instead. In my previous life, she had hidden behind me and pushed me forward. In this life, she climbed up herself, only to discover that a higher place is not always a better one. Before I could answer, Wei Chen Zhou set down his chopsticks. "Lord Lu," he said with perfect calm, "my princess consort does not enjoy involving herself in other people's affairs." Father's face stiffened. I lowered my eyes to hide my smile. The meal ended in an awkward chill. Afterward, the lawful wife ordered a maid to take me to the ancestral shrine so I could offer incense to my birth mother. That part I had not expected, but it suited my purpose perfectly. The shrine in the western courtyard was empty and quiet. I told Tao Niang to wait outside and entered alone. My mother's memorial tablet was still in the same place, thinly coated with dust. That sight alone was enough to tell me that in all these years, no one in this household had ever truly cared to keep incense for her. I lit the incense and lowered my head in silence. A moment later, a very slight sound came from behind me. I turned and saw Lu Yan standing in the doorway. She did not step inside immediately. She only looked at me, and in her eyes was both resentment and a hint of madness she had always kept carefully hidden in the past. "You're quite pleased with yourself, aren't you?" I straightened. "What are you talking about? If I had been the one to marry the Prince of Subei back then the one being protected by him, respected by the entire household, and valued by His Majesty should have been me." I looked at her, feeling strangely calm. "Then perhaps you should ask yourself why back then you despised him for being cold and rough and refused to marry him no matter what." For a moment her face twisted. That was right. Back then, the Prince of Subai's residence truly had intended to seek a marriage alliance with the Lu family, but only because Wei Chenzhou at the time did not yet wield influence equal to the Eastern Palace did the lawful wife and Lu Yan refuse. Later, when Prince An delayed formalizing any engagement while Wei Chenzhou grew more and more favored, they hurriedly changed their minds. They had not expected the imperial edict to come so quickly, or for me to ask to marry him of my own accord, ruining all their plans.
Lu Ruyan ground her teeth together. Don't think he is sincere with you. What powerful man is not fickle? He may cherish you today, but tomorrow he could cast you aside for someone else. I looked straight at her. Are you talking about Prince An? She choked on the words. I took a slow step closer. Lu Ruyan, in my previous life I wanted very badly to defeat you. Looking back now, it was meaningless. I no longer need to win against you, because from the beginning we were never standing on the same road. Her eyes reddened. What gives you the right to say such things? Because I no longer need someone else to hand me a position in order to prove my worth. I paused, then lowered my voice. As for you, no matter how high you climb, your heart still feels empty, because no one has ever truly chosen you. That sentence struck her like a blade straight into her deepest pain. Lu Ruyan lunged forward, trying to slap me. I turned aside and caught her wrist. In the struggle, her hand slammed into the frame behind the memorial tablet. A corner of the wooden backing shifted loose and revealed a tiny gap in the wall. The two of us froze at the same time. I immediately shoved her aside and pressed on the loosened brick. A hidden compartment sprang open. Inside was an old wooden box. Lu Ruyan's face changed violently, and she rushed to snatch it away, but I was faster. Stepping back, I lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of letters. I opened the first one, and the handwriting was so familiar that cold spread through my chest at once. It was a letter from father to someone in the Prince of An's residence in my previous life, discussing how to frame me for the crime. The other letters, some were records of expenditures for purchasing incense, others were instructions on how to send that particular incense into the Prince of Subai's residence under the name of the princess consort's dowry gifts. I lifted my eyes. Lu Ruyan's face had gone paper white. She looked as though she were about to collapse. And I understood at once. She had not only known about it, she had personally taken part of it. Chapter 9. Winds Rising Over the Lu Residence. Hurried footsteps rang out in the courtyard outside. Lu Yan must have dropped something in her agitation just now, enough to alert the servants beyond the door. I held the box of letters in my arms and looked at her bloodless face. My mind, by contrast, had never felt so strangely clear. In my previous life, I had died because I had no evidence. Every crime had been pushed onto my head, and no matter how I cried out my innocence, no one believed me. Now it seemed as though heaven wished to return to me the very thing I had lacked most back then. I could not let these letters disappear. Lu Yan looked ready to rush at me again, but I had already turned my voice cold. "Try touching me again if you dare." She stopped. At that moment, the shrine door opened. The person who entered was not the lawful wife or some servant. It was Wei Chenzhou. He only needed one glance at the box of letters in my hand and Lu Yan's face to understand most of what had happened. His gaze swept once across the room, paused on the hidden compartment standing open, then fell on the letters that had spilled loose. "What happened?" he asked. I handed one of the letters to him. Wei Chenzhou read it. His expression remained calm, but the chill around him deepened at once. Lu Yan retreated half a step. I knew she was afraid, not of me, but of the man standing beside me. Outside in the courtyard, father and the lawful wife came hurrying over as well. The moment father saw the scene in the ancestral shrine, his face changed instantly. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked, though his voice shook. Wei Chenzhou closed the letter and said lightly, "Lord Lu ought to ask that of himself." Father still looked ready to argue, but when I spread the entire stack of letters across the altar table, his complexion turned deathly gray on the spot. The old madam, having heard the news, came hobbling in with her cane. When she saw the evidence laid out clearly before her, all she could do was tremble and ask whether it was forged. No one could answer her. In an instant, the upright and honorable facade of the Lu family was washed away like pasted paper in rain. And yet, standing in the middle of all that chaos, I felt none of the satisfaction I had once imagined, only exhaustion.
exhaustion for the version of myself in my previous life who had once longed so desperately for the thing called family affection in a place like this. Father finally came back to himself. At once he dropped to his knees before Wei Chen-se, saying the letters must have been forged by outsiders. Lu Yan burst into tears and tried to take all the blame upon herself, claiming she had only been foolish for a moment and that father knew nothing about it.
Listening to them, I only wanted to laugh. Even now, at a moment like this, they still wanted to shove the burden back and forth exactly as before. Wei Chen-zhou did not waste a single word arguing with them. He merely ordered the guards to seal the ancestral shrine, then said with quiet indifference, "This matter will be decided by His Majesty." Those 4 words struck the hall like thunder. Father truly collapsed. I knew that the moment the Emperor became involved, this would no longer be something the Lu family could hide. These letters did not concern only me. They also concerned the plot to harm the Prince of Subei and collusion with Prince An's residence. Whatever the final judgment turned out to be, the Lu family would not escape easily. On the carriage ride back, I sat in silence for a very long time. Wei Chen-zhou did not ask many questions. He simply let me lean against the carriage wall. After a while, I finally spoke. "Do you think I'm cruel?" He turned to me. "Why would you be cruel? Whatever else they are, that is still my maiden family. The place that harmed you deserves to be called home?" I had no answer. Wind entered through the carriage curtain, carrying with it the dust of the street and the fading warmth of late afternoon light. Suddenly, I realized that the one person who from beginning to end had never forced me to preserve even a scrap of false dignity for the Lu family was Wei Chen-zhou. He did not speak of family ties just to force me to swallow the pain. Neither did he use kindness to bind my hands. He only stood behind me and let me decide for myself. I reached for his hand. "Thank you." He folded his fingers around mine, holding my hand in his palm. "You don't need to thank me for what I should have done in the first place." That sentence softened my heart completely. But just as the storm had risen over the Lu residence, the palace reacted quickly as well. 2 days later, the Empress announced an autumn banquet and summoned the households connected to the matter into the palace. In name, it was for appreciating chrysanthemums and drinking wine, but everyone knew it was truly meant to sound us out. Tao Nyong was worried when she heard the news. Wei Yi, on the other hand, was furious and declared that those people were surely planning something again. He even very solemnly suggested sneaking a slingshot into the palace so that if anyone bullies mother consort, I'll hit him right in the forehead. The child made me laugh out loud. But after the laughter faded, my heart went still again. I remembered very clearly that before just such a palace banquet, I had been lured into a trap. Things were different now, but the people who wanted Wei Chen-zhou dead and who wanted the secrets of years past buried forever were still there. This autumn banquet would not be simple. On the night before we entered the palace, I had prepared my clothes but still could not sleep. Seeing that, Wei Chen-zhou sat down beside the bed. "Are you afraid?" he asked. I shook my head, then nodded. "I'm afraid," I admitted, "but not for myself. I'm only afraid they may change their method and target you instead." He looked at me, then laid a warm hand against my hair. "Qingha, no matter what happens tomorrow, remember only one thing." "What thing?" "As long as I am here, no one will lay a hand on you." His words nearly brought tears to my eyes, and what I wanted to tell him was this: as long as I am here, I will not let anyone lay a hand on you.
Chapter 10. The Autumn Banquet in the Palace. The autumn banquet was held in the imperial garden on the southern side of the palace. At this season, golden chrysanthemums ran in bands along the paths, and the small lake at the center reflected a pale blue sky overhead. On the surface, it truly looked like an elegant gathering for admiring flowers, but a single glance at the increased number of hidden guards around the grounds was enough to show how many undercurrents lay beneath that calm facade. After accompanying Wei Chen-zhou to pay our respects, I went to join the women's section. The Empress sat above us, her expression as mild and gracious as ever, though when her gaze passed over Wei Chen-zhou and me, it lingered for a moment. Below, Lu Ruyan sat in the place reserved for Prince An's princess consort, her face white as paper. My father stood among the officials, with his head nearly bowed to the ground. At first, the banquet proceeded normally enough. Palace maids served chrysanthemum wine, a young princess composed poetry. People laughed, chatted, and praised the beauty of the day, but everyone knew they were waiting for something. That moment came quickly. A palace maid carried a tray of incense to my place and said that the Empress had heard that I had only recently recovered from illness, so she was specially bestowing a calming incense upon me, very light in fragrance, good for restful sleep when burned.
I had not yet touched it when Wei Chen-cho, seated beside me, looked over. That single look was enough. I understood that he had recognized it too. The scent was very faint, but it was exactly that same sweet finish that left the mind dizzy. Before I could speak, Lu Ruyan, seated opposite, suddenly went visibly pale. I rose at once and bowed toward the Empress. "Your Majesty, this subject wife dares not accept it." The entire garden went silent. The Empress frowned faintly. "Why not?" I looked straight at the tray of incense, my voice steady. "Because this fragrance is one I have seen in records connected to the plot on the Prince of Subei's residence. If I accept it today, I fear I would disappoint your Majesty's wish to bring the truth fully to light." The moment the words left my mouth, several faces changed at once. The Empress lost all trace of her earlier gentleness. She turned to the maid presenting the incense and immediately ordered the imperial physicians and the palace attendants in charge of fragrances to examine it on the spot. A moment later, after smelling it, an elderly imperial physician knelt and reported that the incense indeed contained an herbal component which, over long use, could damage the heart and lungs. The quantity was small, but it must never be used regularly. The whole garden erupted. The Empress asked coldly who had brought this tray inside. Following the chain backward, the trail finally led to a palace maid from the quarters of Prince Anne's princess consort, someone acquainted with people from Jingfang's studio.
By then, Lu Ruyan was trembling so badly she could scarcely remain upright in her seat. Prince Anne rose to defend himself, claiming someone must be framing them. But Wei Chen-jiao had already stepped into the center of the courtyard and presented all the letters taken from the Lu residence, together with the transaction records from Jingfang's studio. He did not speak at length. He simply laid out each connection, each flow of silver, each transfer of goods. The longer he spoke, the darker His Majesty's face became. I stood to one side, watching, my hand clenched tightly within my sleeve. In my previous life, it had also been he who stepped forward to investigate for me. He must have looked much the same then as he did now, calm, direct, peeling the layers of black mud back into the light one by one. The only difference was that back then, I had not been here to watch him do it. When His Majesty demanded to know who had been the last person preparing to send the poisoned incense into the Prince of Subei's residence, Lu Ruyan suddenly dropped to her knees. She cried so hard she could barely get the words out. At first, she still wanted to deny it, still wanted to shift everything onto father and the household stewards. But when His Majesty ordered her handwritten letter read aloud, the one in which she gave precise instructions on how much incense should be replaced so that no one would grow suspicious, her whole body seemed to lose its bones. In the end, she screamed, "I just couldn't accept it." The entire garden fell deathly still. She cried and laughed at once, her eyes red like a madwoman's. From childhood, I was the one taught that I should stand highest, that I should have the very best. So why, in the end, was it her whom Wei Chen-jiao kept in his heart? Why was I the one trapped in Prince Anne's residence, watching his indifference, while she was the one being protected? I couldn't accept it. Listening to her, I felt almost nothing. Even now, at this final moment, all she could say was that she could not accept it. Not once did she say she regretted harming others. His Majesty slammed his hand down on the table in fury. My father threw himself flat to the ground. The lawful wife fainted on the spot. Prince Anne still wanted to deny everything, but every path of evidence had already closed around him. I thought everything was ending there. I had not expected that at the exact moment the guards stepped forward to seize the guilty parties, an assassin disguised as a eunuch suddenly rush out from the edge of the garden, a short arrow in hand, aimed straight at me. Everything happened too quickly. All I managed to hear was Wei Yi shouting in panic from somewhere in the distance, "Mother consort!" In the very next instant, a figure had already moved in front of me. The arrow drove deep into Wei Chen-jiao's left shoulder. I went utterly numb. Before he even turned back to look at me, he had already drawn his sword and struck the assassin down. Blood spilled across his black robes with the movement, bright red and almost blinding to the eye. I rushed forward to catch him. "Wei Chen-jiao!" He frowned only slightly, as though the wound were nothing much, but when I touched the shaft of the arrow, my fingertips shook violently. The imperial physicians and guards all rushed in at once. Someone shouted that the assassin had bitten poison and killed himself. Someone else ordered the palace gates sealed. The entire garden dissolved into chaos. And all I could hear was the wild pounding of my own heart. The smell of blood, the smell of chrysanthemums, the noise of voices, the color of the sky,
all of it suddenly mixed into a nightmare exactly like the one from my previous life, with only one difference. This time, the person collapsing before me was Wei Chen Zhao, and I would never allow that ending to repeat itself.
Chapter 11. Whom the Arrow Was Meant For. The arrow had not struck a vital place, but its tip was poisoned. The imperial physician said that if treatment had been delayed by even another quarter of an hour, once the poison spread more deeply, it would have been very dangerous. I sat outside the side hall, where Wei Chenzhou's wound was being treated, my hands so cold they had gone numb. Wei Yi sat beside me, with red-rimmed eyes, but did not cry. He held my hand very tightly, as if trying to pass what courage he could from his tiny body into mine. "Uncle will be fine," he said, though his voice shook. I nodded and did not dare relax for even a moment. After what felt like an eternity, the imperial physician came out and said the poison had been brought under control. I nearly rushed straight inside. Wei Chenzhou lay on a low couch, his shoulder already bandaged, his face paler than usual. When he saw me enter, he even tried to push himself up. I hurried to stop him. "Don't move." He looked at me, and there was even the slightest curve at the corner of his mouth. "I'm fine." Looking at the blood still seeping through the bandage, I almost burst into tears. "And you still say you're fine?" He was silent for a moment before answering. "I'm used to it." That sentence hurt me more than anything else. Used to being wounded. Used to standing in front of others. Used to treating his own life as something that could be laid down at any time. I lowered my head, my voice tight. "But I'm not used to it." He went still. I gripped his hand and forced back my tears. "Wei Chenzhou, I am not used to seeing you hurt because of me, and I don't want to become used to it in the future either." His gaze deepened. "If it had been you instead, I still would have done the same." "I know." I lifted my head and looked straight at him. "That is exactly why I refuse to treat it as something natural." The room held only the soft sound of candle flames. After a while, he shifted his hand and lightly stroked my fingertips, as though soothing me. "All right," he said. "Next time, I'll be more careful." I knew he was yielding to me, but it still calmed my heart a little. Outside, the investigation into the assassin continued all night. Before dying, the man bit down on poison almost at once, leaving almost no confession behind. But from the command token hidden on his body, they still managed to trace him back to an underground line connected to Prince An. The next morning, His Majesty flew into a rage and issued an edict stripping Prince An of part of his authority, imprisoning Lord Lu to await judgment, and detaining Lu Ruyan separately in the palace for further questioning. Everything seemed as though it had finally reached its end. Yet at noon, while changing Wei Chenzhou's wounds, I noticed an old scar on his shoulder, faint but visible, lying very close to the place where the arrow had just struck. It was not large, yet one could tell at a glance that the injury that had caused it had once been serious.
I looked at it for a while, then asked, "When is this scar from?" Following my gaze downward, he hesitated. "I don't remember clearly." I did not believe him. "Was it from the previous life?" He fell silent. That silence itself was the answer. I set the medicine chest down. "So, from the very beginning, you knew I had returned in this life?" He let out a light breath. "At first, I wasn't certain, but from the day you asked of your own accord to marry me, I thought perhaps heaven had taken pity on me once as well." He paused. "Later, when I looked into your eyes, I became even more certain." I froze. "Then why didn't you say anything?" "And what would saying it have done?" he asked softly in return. "Would I force you to carry the burden of an entire lifetime beside me? I only thought that if you had truly returned, then all I needed to do was protect you and let you live in peace." I bit my lip. "And what about me? Did you ever think how much it would hurt me to learn the truth so late?" He looked at me for a long time. Then, for the first time, this man who always kept everything locked away spoke a sentence that was almost a confession. "I was afraid." I stared at him. "Afraid that if I told you, you would feel indebted. Afraid that you would stay by my side only out of pity, not because you truly wished to." Something struck hard against my chest. This man, who did not even frown in front of the Son of Heaven, had been afraid that I might pity him. I lowered myself until my face was so close to his that the tips of our noses nearly touched. "Wei Chenzhou." "Listen carefully." I spoke word by word. "I am not beside you because I owe you something. I am here because I want to be." His breathing turned uneven. I continued. "In my previous life, I was blind,
In this life, I am awake. I know what you once did for me, but that is not the only reason I chose you. The reason is because—" Suddenly my voice caught. He looked at me as though waiting for a verdict he did not dare hope for. I closed my eyes, and at last I said it. "Because I like you." The room went so still it was almost frightening. Even the wind at the window seemed to stop. Only after a very long moment did Wei Chen-jo ask in a hoarse voice, "Ching-ha, can you say that again?" I laughed through my tears. "I like you." The instant the words left me, he pulled me into his arms. The movement was too forceful, and it must have hurt his wound because I heard him draw a quiet breath through his teeth, but he still did not let go. Neither did I pull away. I only held him tightly in return, as though I wanted to embrace even the loneliness and cold he had borne alone through 2 lifetimes. At that exact moment, Wei Yi coughed delicately outside the door. Should I go back out for a while? I sprang away from Wei Chen-jo at once, my face burning hot.
Wei Yi came in carrying a box of fresh pastries that had just been bestowed by the Imperial Kitchen and shook his head in theatrical despair. "Fine, I understand. From now on, I'm probably the most unnecessary person in this residence." I was both mortified and amused. Wei Chen-cho for once did not scold him. He only told him to put the pastries down and go outside to play. Wei Yi clutched his chest. "I've been wounded." "Where?" "In my soul." With that, he ran off hugging the other pastry box, clearly in better spirits than anyone else. Watching him, I burst out laughing, and all at once I understood. This was what I truly wanted to gain in this life. Not to defeat anyone, not to climb anywhere, only to remain beside the person I had chosen, and to be able to laugh like this every day. That same afternoon, the final imperial decree came down. Lord Lu, for colluding with Prince Anne's residence, secretly plotting against the Prince of Subei, and taking part in the framing of imperial kin the previous year, was stripped of office and imprisoned. The lawful wife was exiled back to her ancestral home. Lu Ruyan was reduced to common status and banished 3,000 li away. Prince Anne was also stripped of authority and confined to his residence pending further punishment. When I heard the news, I felt none of the satisfaction I had once imagined. It only felt as though the final knot in a chain of cause and effect had at last been tied shut. That night, I sat by the bed and watched Wei Chen-cho finish his bowl of medicine. He frowned at the bitterness, so I lifted a preserved plum to his lips. He looked a little startled, but still opened his mouth and accepted it. I smiled. "In this life you must live longer than I do." He took my hand, his eyes softer than I had ever seen them. "I will live a very long life with you." Chapter 12. The Lantern Night We Did Not Miss Again. After more than half a month of recovery, Wei Chen-jo's shoulder was almost no longer a serious concern. Though the imperial physician still insisted he needed more rest, this man began handling official matters the moment he could move his arm. If Wei Yi and I had not taken turns keeping watch over him, he likely had gone out to practice swordsmanship already. After the turmoil in the palace, the capital became strangely quiet. The rumors that had once swirled around my marriage changed into something else entirely. Everyone now said that the prince and princess consort of Subei shared deep devotion, that before everyone in the palace itself, the prince had taken an arrow for his consort. Wei Yi heard these stories and excitedly repeated them back to me, then asked whether I wanted him to go outside and add a few more touching details. I rapped him lightly on the head. "If you have that much energy for gossip, then write 20 extra characters today." He clutched his head and cried injustice, then turned to complain to Wei Chen-jo that Mother Consort had learned how to punish people now. Watching the scene, an almost unfamiliar peace rose quietly in my chest. The weather gradually turned toward winter. On the very day the end-year lantern festival opened again in the capital, Wei Yi made a great commotion about going into the streets to see the excitement. I was just about to say that the weather was too cold and that we should go another time, when Wei Chen-jo suddenly set down his ledger and asked, "Do you want to go?" I stilled. The lantern night. The night in my old memories when I missed my chance with him. The night when I searched among the lights for a figure for a very long time. I looked at him and nodded slowly. "I do." And so that evening the Prince of Subei's residence was as lively as a family heading out to a fair. Wei Yi wrapped a red scarf around himself, clutched his spending money, and charged ahead first, all while promising that he would not run around. As a result, less than a quarter hour later, the guards had to drag him back because he had become so engrossed at watching the lion dance that he forgot the world.
Wei Chenzhou and I walked behind him at an unhurried pace. The lantern-lit streets blazed like a river of stars. Rabbit lanterns, lotus lanterns, dragon lanterns, revolving lanterns. Both sides of the road were hung thick with them. The cold wind carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and barley candy. It made the whole crowd seem less stern than usual. Everyone's smile looked a little brighter. Walking in the flow of people, I could not help remembering the lantern night from years ago. Back then I was younger, more uncertain, and had not yet understood what I truly wanted, so all I felt was confusion and disappointment. But now the person I had once searched in that sea of lights was standing right beside me, close enough that I only needed to shift my hand to touch him. I stopped overthinking and reached out to hold his hand of my own accord. Wei Chenzhou lowered his gaze to look at it, and something moved slightly in his eyes. "There are too many people," I said with great seriousness. "I might get lost." The corner of his mouth lifted faintly.
We mustn't get lost." After walking a while, we stopped before a stall selling floating lanterns by the lakeside. The surface of the water reflected 1,000 points of light, and the night wind carried the distant sound of a flute. Wei Yi came running over hugging a carp-shaped lantern, insisting that we choose lanterns of our own and set them afloat for good fortune. I chose a small lotus lantern. Wei Chenzhou looked over the selection once and took one shaped like a moon. The moment Wei Yi saw it, he burst into a grin. "I knew it!" I tilted my head. "Knew what?" "I knew Uncle would pick something connected to Mother Consort." He swayed smugly. "Your name is Ching He. Moonlit night, lake water, lantern light. It all suits you." I pinched his cheek. But when I turned back, I caught Wei Chenzhou's gaze, and it very plainly said the boy had guessed correctly. I bent over and wrote a wish on the small slip of paper. I did not pray for wealth. I did not pray for power. I wrote only 8 words. "May the one beside me know peace for life." After setting the lantern on the water, I turned and saw that Wei Chenzhou had not yet released his. "What did you write?" He did not let me look. He only shook his head. "I'm not saying." "A secret?" A moment later, he lowered his lantern to the water. Just then, a gust of wind swept over the lake, and my lantern drifted close to his. The two flickered side by side, before floating together toward the middle of the water. The sight made me smile. It seems even heaven knows the way. He did not answer. He only raised a hand and adjusted the cloak on my shoulders, so naturally that it was as though he had done it hundreds of times before. I lifted my face to look at him. In the blaze of the lantern light, the line of his features seemed softer than usual. Suddenly, I remembered the question I had let slip away over 2 lifetimes. "Wei Chenzhou? When was the first time you truly liked me?" He looked at the lake for a moment before answering. "When you were just being pulled up from the water and were still coughing, yet you still insisted on lifting your head to ask whether you looked very ugly." I stared, then burst out laughing. "That alone?" "That alone." I gave him a suspicious look. "Are you sure you're remembering wrong? How can anyone start liking someone because of a sentence like that?" Only then did he fully turn to look at me. Amid the noisy crowd around us, his voice sounded especially clear. "Because at that moment, you had obviously just been hurt by others. Your eyes were still red, your hands were still shaking, and yet the first thing you worried about was whether you looked ugly, whether you had lost face. I thought then that this young lady seemed soft, but there was a stubbornness in her bones that was almost heartbreaking." Listening to him, I wanted to laugh and cry at once. So there had been someone watching me long before I could even see myself clearly. I fell silent for a few moments, then asked, "Then why didn't you say anything afterward?" "I was going to," he answered softly. "I had prepared myself that lantern night." I understood. That was the night I had been called home halfway through, the night he waited for me and I never arrived. I tightened my hold on his hand. "It's fortunate that in this life we still had time." He looked at me, warmth burning in the depths of his eyes like fire. We did." From the distance, Wei Yi came running toward us, clutching another string of candied hawthorns, shouting for the 2 of us not to keep standing by the lake because there were fireworks to see. Wei Chenzhou and I turned at the same time, and without planning it, we both laughed. The fireworks burst into bloom just as we crossed the stone bridge. Their thunder rolled through the night sky, while clusters of brilliant light exploded overhead and reflected onto the lake in shimmering ribbons of color.
I stood amid the crowd on the bridge, looking up at the sky, then leaned my head lightly against Wei Chenzhou's shoulder. There were no more conspiracies, no more missteps born of false calculations, no more spending half a lifetime chasing what had never belonged to me. There was only the person before me, the lantern light behind me, a child's laughter ahead of me, and a heart that had finally found the right place to come to rest.
Hey there! If you enjoy our audio content, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Most importantly, click subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated with everything Zuzu Audio. Support the channel and join our community today.